There
Thank
we
you for letting
go.
thank you for letting me know that, because that would have been really sad if I'd gone through the whole thing and not recorded any of it.
I was just like, oh no, wait, wait,
Okay, so but we're going to talk a little bit about form today anyway. So last time we talked about the Jabberwocky, and we talked about, which we will get to, we'll actually go back to it at the end of this, and we'll talk about it. But with each one of these poems, we're going to talk about form. So we're going to start with the poem with no form, or the free verse poem. And so we will start with essentially this one. Now, one thing you probably notice, and I'm going to talk about a few terms, and I'll type them in when I use them. You'll notice that this, you already know there's a little irregularity. And what tells you that there's a little irregularity with this poem?
wait.
If you kind of just scroll down,
The stanzas are all different lengths.
yes, and you use the word stanza. So, in writing prose, we think of paragraphs. And then, of
Yeah.
course, the indentations that say when we're on to the next paragraph. So in poetry, of course, the lines don't run to the end most of the time, unless you read what is called a prose poem, which is poetic form, but, well, it's poetic language, but in prose form. So it just runs to the end and whatever. Most of them have very selected line endings. And so, and often they complete a sentence, sometimes they don't. But the stanzas in a formed poem, a very strict form poem, are going to be very rigid. They will all be similar. So in this case, though, we know just from the first 4 lines that we have a stanza of 3 lines and then a stanza of 1. That's already telling you this is not going to follow some sort of established rigid form, and it's free verse. Now, the next thing you can do, though, is just look at the line endings. So if I say, well, I mean, we just look at those words. What are the words on the last, like, the first 6 lines?
The first 6 lines seem to be poem and light, slide,
Mm-hmm.
hive, poem again, and then out.
Now, do any of those rhyme?
Not really.
No. The closest we get is that there's a repetition of the I sound. So light, slide, and hive all have that, but that's not even really an approximate rhyme. The closest is like slide and hive, but that's, any poet would go, that's not a very good rhyme, and they'd switch it out if they were really trying to rhyme. And then as you go further, it's just going to keep on continuing, where it doesn't really, there's no, first of all, too, they also have this 2-line stanza, then another 2-line stanza, and then a 3-line stanza with a period at the end, and then a 3-line stanza with a period at the end, and then a 2-1. So but the words continue, that the room and switch and water ski and poem and shore, do, rope, it, hose, means. They don't rhyme at all. So those are the 2 absolutes that tell you automatically something's going on with this. Now, we do have, though, and Shakespeare used this a lot in his plays, we have what's called blank verse. And I'll talk about it more once we get to when we talk about the sonnets and everything. Sonnets actually have a rhyme scheme. Blank verse, though, is essentially the same length of line as a sonnet form, but it has no rhyme. So even if a poem has no rhyme, it could be a very strict form. But blank verse is just unrhymed, and I'll put this in here, but I'm not, don't freak out, okay? Unrhymed iambic pentameter. Okay.
That was the thing with the oh ah it went out of my brain, sorry.
It's okay. So in this, though,
Syllable.
I mean, if you're looking for rhythms, and this is going to be the hardest part, if you're looking for rhythms, that's the only thing that Billy Collins may have used to make this poem anything else but free verse. In this case, though, it is not. It is not. There is no consistent meter to this. No consistent rhythm. So it is just free verse. And will this be on the test? Yes. Verse. And that just means it has no regular rhyme, it has no regular rhythm, and it has no regular line length or system of stanzas or anything like that. There are no rules applied to the poem. So essentially, what Billy Collins did is just choose the ending that seemed most appropriate, whether to make it be read out loud or whatever. But more than anything else, it's actually designed around the idea of different methods and different metaphors. And we're going to, that could end up too, or different comparisons that are created through the images that are written in this poem. So the first thing is it starts out with the actual, it says, I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide. And so it's just like looking at the form of it. And have you ever looked at like old slides, photographic slides?
Uh,
My guess is no.
like in those little click things.
Like, well, I mean, they were in little, they came in little white, they were like little white frames, really flat. And inside, you really had to put it up to your eye and then look towards like the bright sunshine, not the sun, because that would blind you, but towards, you know, if you looked up at the sky, it would bring enough light through and you'd see the picture.
Yeah,
And
I think I have.
good. Oh, and people
My
would
grandmother
put
had
those in a
one.
projector, a slide projector. And those, you know, not an opaque projector, but a slide projector, this big round sort of thing that would, and you could click it and it would go to the next slide, click it and go to the next slide. I mean, this is way old school. Probably most people in this class have never seen anything like that. I actually have taken photos with a real camera that ended up being made into slides, believe it or not. I did that when I went to the Grand Canyon. So, and I still
Ooh.
remember that as a kid, as a teenager. But I'm old. So most people don't use any of this today. What do? We take it on our phones, we send it to somewhere, and then if we want prints, we send it to somewhere, and then we go pick up the prints. There's no film anymore. I mean, very few people use real cameras. It's just everything's changed. But in this case, he's using that metaphor, that slide, so we're looking up through it, almost like a microscopic slide, or you know, where you look through and you're just letting the light pour through and to see it. And then he says, or press an ear against its hive. And that goes to a totally different metaphor, like you're listening for it. So the way you would if you were actually brave enough to want to listen to a beehive, you'd stick your ear up against it and then you would hear the bzzz and all of the activity in the hive.
Yeah, you can definitely hear them buzzing around in there.
And so in a way, you know, us reading the poem is that buzzing. You're listening closely to what how the poem sounds. So first you look at it, you know, kind of all at once. You know, this is the form of the poem, which we kind of just did looking at the stanzas. And then we
Yeah.
listen to it. And so when we read it out loud, that's a way to listen to the poem. So, and I press an ear against its hive. So let's listen to what it sounds like so that we can get a little bit more understanding of how it works. And then he says, I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. So it's like a puzzle. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. So look at all the words, kind of muddle yourself inside of it and find your way out by turning on lights. And then it says, I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. And in other words, I want them to have fun with it, which is what I would, that's exactly, I swear this, there's so much about this person that reminds me of me. But what I want is for people to have fun with it and enjoy it and just scoot along the surface of it and play. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. And so this is, unfortunately, I don't know that students so much do this, but they've been taught to do this by teachers. Like your job is to take all, you know, rip it apart, beat it to death, and then figure out what all the pieces mean and how they add up. And that's not how you know, essentially he's Billy Collins is even saying this is not how you really address what's beautiful about a poem. I mean, think about how you deal with music and a song. and how so much of it starts with just feeling it and just listening to it, and and listening to not just the words but the way they come out. The notes in a song are very much like the form in a poem, in that the words matter, and they matter, it matters how they're lined up and how they're expressed. And so, but we don't just enjoy poems. We're thinking, okay, I got to figure out what this poem's meaning. Okay, okay. And then we clamp it down. And the truth is, I've had students over the years, of course, I've been teaching for 30 years, but I've had students in that time who were furious with me when I refused to say what something meant. And well, what does it really mean? You asked me what I think it means, but what does it really mean? And I said, well, part of it, what it means is what you think it means. And they don't like that. They want the definite answer. This, though, is not science. Just like reading the short stories, you can come up with different interpretations based upon your different experiences and your different backgrounds and different triggers. You're going to have the same thing happen with poems, probably even more so, because there's less, there are fewer words to go by. And so, and they're saying them far more briefly. And so you may come up with an idea and it just doesn't match mine. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. All you have to do, even when you're getting to the end, when you're writing a paper about the poems, all you have to do is really figure out why you think it means what you think it means. So show me the lines that illustrate your answer. That's all. It's not, oh, do I agree with the teacher? Because I only have one, I mean, and my viewpoints are often very open. I want to see kind of more of a collective understanding of these poems anyway. And so he is, Billy Collins is in exactly the same boat. The this person wants people to approach poetry as fun and a mystery, and oh, isn't it cool what we end up finding out? And he fights to keep it from being something where you just pin down the ending and pin down the meaning and then move on. And the truth is no one wants to read a story like that. No one wants to read a poem like that. It's not fun. And above all, reading should be fun.
Oh,
So
yes.
that's my opinion. I'm reading right now. I'm reading a sort of a trilogy, a very loose trilogy, but I'm just having the funnest time with it. It's so well described. It's just lush. It's such a nice group of novels, and I want to enjoy it. If I don't enjoy a book, I'm not going to finish it. I don't have classes anymore. Now, obviously, I'm trying to pick poems that I think you guys will like, but I of course hope to in journals that people are honest with me when they like or don't like something too. Okay, so now do you understand though that there's no form to this? Well, I mean, there is a form, it's just not a regular form. So free verse
Yeah.
has no rhyme, no strict rhythm, and we'll get to rhythm more. I'm not going to try to parse this one because it'll freak people out. But it has no, I mean, it really will. If there's no established rhythm and you're trying to find the rhythm, it is so frustrating. So, but I'll try to walk you guys through that. And I probably won't get fully to that until the next, like tomorrow's chat. I'm going to intentionally bring in some poems and only look at form, not just look at meaning, but I'll look at the ones they're due for today, but I'm going to use them to help kind of bring in the idea of form, because that's the hardest and most mathematical of any of the things we do with poetry. And it's often the most frustrating for students to learn. And so but I want you to understand it enough. Do you have to remember all of the different feet and all of the different meters and stuff? No, but I do want you to know what like iambic pentameter is, mainly because it's going to guide the sentence, the sonnet, and it's going to be used a lot, even when we get to the Shakespeare later on in the third unit. So let's go ahead go back to the textbook, and I think I've made it about as big as I think I need to. But in this case, this is John Keats again. We're going back to the Ode on the Grecian Urn. Now, we're not looking at all about, we already talked about what it might mean and what it's trying to say. Instead, we're going to look at form. So the one we just looked at was pretty much, it had no regular form. But Keats's poem does have a regular form. And it's, if you want to even look at, I mean, and we can do that just counting down. if you look at the first stanza, for instance, and do make sure you you understand stanza because you've already used the word, Jordan. But that's, I want to make sure when people write about the poems in the essays, for instance, they don't say in the first paragraph, because it's not a paragraph, it's a stanza. But I'll correct people if they send me a rough draft. So we should be okay. But just remember, that's one of those terms that could certainly end up on the test too. So he says, thou still unravished bride of quietness. Now let's just look at rhyme, just like we did with the last poem and saw that there was no rhyme. Let's look at these. So we have quietness and time and express and rhyme. And that seems to have a pattern. So there's essentially what we have is what's called, it's A, B, A, B. And that just means it's the first rhyme, then the second rhyming line, then the third matches the first. So A, then B, then A, and then B again. And that's all it's saying. So if we were to write next to it, we would literally write A, B down the side of the poem. And then the next one is shape, both, Arcady. Okay. Then loath, escape, and ecstasy. So it's a little bit wackier. So we have A, and then it's C, because this is not, it doesn't rhyme with either of the other lines. So C, D, E, and then D, C, E, because they're switched. So both rhymes with loath, shape with escape, and Arcady with ecstasy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's weird though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So it's A, B. So if I asked you to do, okay, what's the rhyme scheme for this? A, B, C, D, E, D, C, E.
Yeah.
And then the next one, now we have to see, okay, well, so that's what it was for the first one. Is that going to be consistent? So and we'll just start from the beginning. Normally it would be like F, G, and all, but we'll just start as if heard melodies are sweet. We'll just start with A again. Okay. So we have
Okay.
unheard, play on, endeared, which is an approximate rhyme with unheard,
Hmm.
and tone, which is also an approximate rhyme. Then we have leave, bear, kiss, and grieve, bliss, and fair. So it's a slight variation on that, but it's still essentially it's A, B, then it's C, D, E, then C, E, D. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's still a six, it's the four in the top and then six at the bottom, but they're not, it's not CDE is what you'd kind of expect. Now let's just keep following, and you're thinking, okay, this is really boring. It's okay, you'll get used to it. So
Nah,
then
it's
we have
interesting.
shed and adieu and unwearied, which is supposed to rhyme with, it's probably unwearied is how he's intending it, so that they're rhyming, and then new. So it's again, it's the ABAB. Then love, enjoyed, young, above, cloyed, tongue. Now we get the AB, CDE. So each one's been different though, slightly, only slightly. And so if we were to keep going, it's the same thing, ABAB. Then we have shore, citadel, and mourn. Then we have evermore to rhyme with shore, tell with citadel, and return, which is approximate rhyme with mourn. So then it's CDE again. And if I ever lose you, just tell me, Jordan, and then I'll come back. And then the
Okay.
same thing, AB, and then pastoral, waste, woe. Then we have saist, which is D, all, which is pastoral, so D, C, E. And it's a slight variation. It actually goes back to the variation that was at the beginning, this one, in this stanza. And so, but each time he's just kind of playing with it. But is it a regular form? Yeah, even with those variances, it's still a regular form. So we have a rhyme scheme. We have all of the stanzas are the same length of lines. And so we can assume this is a very formal poem. Now, it's not that, it's not that I want you to go, oh, well, this is this. Like, I'm not going to ask you, okay, what's a villanelle and what's a, this is technically just an ode. And an ode is just the kind of poem that is essentially written in honor of someone. So it's just or something. In this case, it's in honor of the Grecian urn that he's looking at, and it often describes their life, or it describes what it is and what the meaning of that, or what it means to them, what that person or that object means to them. But it's just kind of like a laudatory. It's it's praise of some kind, usually an ode is. But in this case too, and I'm going to do this more, but I'm going to show you something just really quick, just to scare you. And I'm just going to parse it just a little bit. And that just means I'm going to look at the rhythms of it. And the easiest way to start with looking at rhythms is to look at words that have more than one syllable in them. So for instance, we have, of course, this first line, it says, thou still, those are two single syllable, they only have one syllable apiece. So that's not,
Yeah.
we have unravished, right? And we have quietness. So unravished, what we're looking for is stresses and unstresses. And you're going to think, well, I don't even know how to do any of that. Well, you would, if I pronounce it wrong, you'll know, because we don't necessarily pay attention to it, but we know how to read words so that they pronounce them correctly. So unravished, and you can hear me kind of stress it. Where is the
Hmm.
stress in that word, unravished?
Is it on the Rav and Ravished?
It's the rav. So unravished. See, if I said unravished, you'd go, what? Unravished. Because it's not on un. And it's
May
rarely on
I?
the un part anyway. But go ahead.
Um, that first line, is it the first three words have like five syllables and then the last three words have five syllables? So it's like thou still, two
Okay, so
syllables, and
you
then
have 10 syllables. You can certainly count syllables first, and that's probably going to be a good indicator. Except, so you say, so that, but you're looking for those stresses. What matters is how many stresses are per line, not necessarily how many syllables. But the multi-syllable words give you an idea of where the stresses are. The other stresses
ooh.
usually are on the most potent words. So for instance, on ravish, we know rav is kind of the focus, not, it's where the punch is. That's the stress. So we'll have unstressed syllables and then stress syllables. And think about, an unstressful day, you're just relaxing, everything's chill. And then a stressful day, people yell at you and it's just really intense. That's what you're really looking at. So if I were to look at this, just the other words, so quietness, obviously, we have quiet. The quiet is the stress. So we don't say quiet, we say quiet. And the stress is in that first part, qui. So if I take the rav and the qui and make those stressed, then I'm looking for other words that are potent. Bride is absolutely potent. And then still can be. Thou still, and I'll just read it to you, and then you tell me what you think. Thou still unravished bride of quietness. Does that make sense? Do you hear those stresses? Do they feel okay? You're going to be over emphasizing it first.
I think maybe I'm a little bit picking up on it.
Okay, and then if you keep going, try to do the same thing. But essentially what I'm saying is it's thou is unstressed, still is stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. Usually ofs and thes, they're almost never stressed. Of and then qui, unstressed, ness could be either. You don't say quietness. That's a little too wacky. but it could be stressed or it could be unstressed. This right here is out of those 10 syllables, you have unstressed, and I'll just put a little U for that, and then stressed, a U, U. It takes me a while. I should be typing them more close together too. I'll show you. So it's U slash U slash U slash U slash. Okay, the way I typed it in is separating the pieces. So I put it's the U would go over thou, the still would have a slash over it. Un has a little U, then Rav would have a slash. And I can't write it because it's in the textbook. But essentially you're creating 5 feet that look exactly the same. That's what we call metric feet. And so each one of those is an unstressed stress, which is, of all things, iambic. And one I am, and I'll type that in too, is an unstressed stressed. And that's all. We're not going to go through more, besides this foot today. So we have iambic, and then how many feet do we have in this line? Thou still unravished bride of quietness.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5. So it is pentameter.
Oh.
Pentameter. If it were 4, then it would be tetrameter or tetrameter, depending on whether you're British or not. And all it says is it's either 4 feet of them or 5 feet of them or 3. It could be trimeter, and that's just 3 feet. But it tells you what kind of feet is it using, what is the pattern of stresses and how many of those feet are in here. And so thou still unravished bride of quietness, you could say, okay, that's 5. So that's iambic pentameter, but then keep on going. In fact, I often encourage students to skip to like the middle of the poem or skip to the second stanza or something, because a lot of times the first stanza is a little bit weird. And so, but even if you move down a little bit, so let's do the second stanza just so we can follow the pattern I normally have students do. So heard melodies. So melodies is definitely stressed on the first syllable. And the secondary stresses with D's, melodies, are sweet, but those unheard. So heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard, that's 5 iambic feet. Not to, see, that's a little bit weird. It's almost like not to. And so there's a stress, unstressed, but then it's unstressed, stressed. The sensual ear, but more endeared. And then it goes back. So sometimes there will be, and I'll just put this backwards. So that line is really like this, where it's a stressed, unstressed, and then it's for unstressed, stress. So you take whatever's the most dominant. It's still iambic, though that first thing is what we call a trochee instead of an iamb, because it has a stressed, unstressed. But are we going to learn all of them? No, I'm not going to get into the anapestic and dactylic and stuff like that, because you guys, your minds will blow. But it's fun, honestly. I like math, so I like parsing sentences and I like mathematical English too. I think it's fascinating, but a lot of people don't. It's totally cool if whoever is watching this, you go, oh, I hate this. You'll get through it, and it's not everything we're going to do. But I want you to start listening to those things, because it's kind of like honestly, it's a way of seeing too how these things are like lyrics in music, because if words don't fit right and they don't rhyme right and they don't rhythmically match the music, they sound dumb. And so, especially in things, even in rap is so rhythmically necessary. It has to have a rhythm that matches, or it just falters. If somebody were to go up there and use icky rhythms and try to do rap, it's just going to sound bad, because rhythm is so necessary. Not even more necessary than rhyme in rap, in my opinion. But the truth is most songs on the radio and on Spotify and iTunes. Almost all of them, if they have words, they rhyme, and they have a very regular rhythm. They often have stanzas that are ballad stanzas, and that's where they repeat the same thing over again. It's kind of like, remember in let me go, since we're done with Billy Collins, let me see. Oh, I can't, it won't let me back. But if you look at "'Twas Brillig and the Slithy Toes," back, if we go back to the Jabberwocky,
Hmm.
it's repeated at the beginning, but then it's all, the entire stanza is repeated again at the very end. And that,
Oh yeah.
do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's like a ballad stanza. In country music, for instance, you know that usually they have three movements in a country music song, and they'll have a part of the story, then they'll have a stanza that is just a ballad stanza where they talk about whatever it is that generally the song's about. And then they'll go to the next verse and they have a new, you know, some other event that happens, and then they'll go back to their repetitive ballad stanza. And that's very traditional. I mean, I say country music, but honestly, a lot of songs do that, where they repeat what they call the refrain. You know that, right? That's
The
more
refrain.
music terms. The refrain.
Hmm.
And
And
that's,
that's like the ballad stanza.
yes. So it's in that kind of a thing very often, and honestly, in even old folk music that was passed down for centuries before it was ever written down, songs like Barbara Allen and things like are actually very old songs. They're hundreds of years old, but they were finally written down after being passed along. But a lot of those old ballads actually have ballad stanzas. They have some repetition either at the last line or two of a regular stanza or a stanza on its own that keeps repeating. And so those repetitive stanzas are absolutely part of not only music, but poetry. So that
Wow.
repetition is very common. Um, Not so much at Keats, but so if we, you know, and that of course skips all this. Now they try to actually explain this, and I think, what page is this? On page 39 in the textbook. They really try to spend some time, but it is so hard to use these instructions and try to figure this out. So probably the best thing to do is, I mean, and I would be more than willing, if anybody ever wants, they're like, I don't even get this, this is really hard, whatever, just talk to me about it, or write on a piece of paper, you know, take a poem, print it out, and try to mark it with your pencil, and mark the stressed, unstressed, and then just send it to me. And so, or take a picture of it and say, this is what I've tried, is this right? And then I can make corrections and send it back to you. I literally, I could print it out, make the corrections on it in purple pen or something, and then scan it back to you so you could see exactly what my notations would be. And I want you to play. This is not something too that's an exact science. It's just a little more precise than some of the other stuff we're doing, but it can be really fun, especially if it's not like, I'm not going to tell you on I'm not going to have, you know, 18 different kinds of poetry on this, on the test, and say, okay, each one of these has a regular rhythm, please tell me what it is, and then you have to go through and parse through all of the stuff. No, I might ask you for the rhyme scheme, and I might ask you about, you know, something that ends up being iambic pentameter. I can pretty much ask to tell you if it's, if I say what's the, you know, and I'll probably even say it like, what's these lines from the sonnet, blah blah blah. You know, please parse these. Tell me what the rhythm is. And the truth is every sonnet is iambic pentameter. So just like the Keats, even though this is not a sonnet, this is in iambic pentameter. And iambic is the most common poetic rhythm in the English language. Why? Because we speak, for the most part, in iambic not pentameter, but iambic phrasing. We have unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed all the time. And it's just the way that we function. It's the way that we communicate. It's not the case for every other language, though. So a lot of other, like Italian, for instance, has very easy rhymes because so many of their words rhyme, have similar endings. But Italian also tends to have more of a like, it has more unstressed beats in between stresses. So it's more likely to be something like anapestic or something like that, which I'm not going to tell you what anapestic is. Just, I feel like I have to say something. It's just unstressed, unstressed, stressed. That's all. So there,
Wow.
its feet are 3 syllables long. And if you had an anapestic tetrameter or something, there would be 12 syllables total, and there would be 4 feet. So I'll just write that anapestic. That just means 4 feet of 4 anapests. And so that's all it's saying. It's just it's almost a mathematical measurement detailing how a poetic form is being used. What rhythm is this particular poem using? That's all. And it has no effect on rhyme. So you don't have to have any rhyme at all to have a regular meter. A lot of people actually will read a poem and they'll say, oh, it must be free verse because they don't see a rhyme scheme. And there's actually a very regular meter. Blank verse that I talked about earlier that Shakespeare uses is iambic pentameter, but unrhymed. It has no rhyme scheme, or it might end in a couplet where 2 lines rhyme to each other. Their endings are the same. But other than that, it has no rhyme at all. That's very typical. And then, of course, there are actual poems. I mean, there are plays where the entire play is written in couplets. And boy, that is so hard to perform because we're just not used to things being super sing-songy. And so it gets kind of annoying. You have to be really careful how you memorize the lines and stuff. But they can still be fun plays. They're just kind of hard to put on and make not silly. So, does that all make sense, Jordan?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions on anything I've talked about?
Uh, not at this moment.
Okay. Well, and again, this is just a smattering. So we're going to play around with all of this more. And it's not just so that I can bore everybody to tears. It's really so that you can feel more facility with it. It's almost like, it's like in math, you explain a problem in math or a teacher does, and then they give you, example after example that they work out on the board. That's kind of what we're going to be doing so that you can look at any sort of poem. I'm trying to think of what else we have in here. Is there another one in here? I don't think they list another one in this chapter. Yeah, they're not. Oh, there it is. Okay, this is a sonnet. This is Shakespeare's My Mistress' Eyes, or Sonnet 130. Yeah. But if you take this, of course, we already know it's a sonnet. So what kind of what's its meter going to be?
Iambic pentameter.
Yes. Every single one of them is going to be iambic pentameter. Even if one of the lines is a little weird, it overall the poem is going to be iambic pentameter. That's one of the specifications for what makes a sonnet, is it has to be an iambic pentameter. There are other things too, and I talk about it, like, see, with the ballad stanza. And there's actually a ballad stanza. Honestly, if you have you ever heard of the song "The Yellow Rose of Texas"?
I think I've heard it, but it's been a little
It
while.
is it is an old song, but it uses the typical ballad stanza form, which means it follows a certain rhythm. And so, like, for instance, if you look at this, I heard a fly buzz when I died, da 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 da. So it's iambic tetrameter. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. So it's essentially tetrameter. It's all iambic. Tetrameter and then trimeter and then tetrameter and then trimeter. So 4 3 4 3. But if you sing it to the Yellow Rose of Texas, it matches. So the Yellow Rose of Texas is just an old sort of country song, sort of. Oh, the Yellow Rose of Texas. You've heard that, right?
I think I may be thinking of something different now.
Okay, so it's just an old folk song, really American folk song, and it's about this woman in Texas, who's the Yellow Rose of Texas, and blah blah blah. But in that, you can actually sing this. All of this is Emily Dickinson's poetry, and you can sing all of her poetry to the Yellow Rose of Texas because she uses that form, and it comes from It's called the ballad stanza form because they used it in song ballads for years and years and really centuries, and so that's why you can, and there are a lot of songs actually I could probably put to this. It's just the Yellow Rose of Texas is what I kind of learned to use with her poems. So I'll try to think of a more modern song, and we'll test. I'll test it on Emily Dickinson's poetry and see if I can't come back tomorrow with something better that's at least more familiar to you guys. It might be a country song though, because country music is far more likely to use a ballad stanza like this. So, but you don't have any questions, at least at this point. Are you a little mind blown? It's okay if you're kind of confused and feeling uncomfortable.
I'm not really too confused. I think it's just gonna take a little while because I'm not used to thinking of it in this way.
Right. And most people aren't. I'm just a nerd, so I really like this kind of stuff. So we'll talk more about form next time, and then we'll also get into some of the other terms from this chapter. So hopefully that we'll be able to deal with things like character, and even, I mean, there is going to be a plot to some of our poems that we're going to cover. Certainly there's setting, you know, all those kinds of things. They're just going to be a little bit different for poetry that they are for prose. And so we're still going to have perspective. We're still going to have irony. Irony is going to be a little bit, you know, it's honestly still, it's harder to find, I guess, in poems for me. But diction and tone and things like that, those are ones we really haven't talked about with prose, and we'll get into them with poetry. So we'll talk about some of those things too. But
Ooh,
because you're the only person here and I don't want to talk about any poems that are due tonight, I'm not going to cover the rest of them yet. Okay? And we'll do those
okay.
tomorrow. And we'll continue to talk about form, and you can go, oh man, this is getting either easier or more complicated. I don't know. The main thing is I want you to understand form before you address the task of writing your own sonnet. Because if you don't understand rhythm, it's going to be hard for you to make the rhythm work. It's going to be very frustrating to write the sonnet. Okay?
Okay.
So it'll be a challenge, but we'll get through it. All be fun. Hopefully
Sounds
we'll keep
fun.
having fun with this. Don't take it too seriously and we'll be fine. Okay?
Woohoo.
Thanks, Jordan. I'll see you next
Thank
time.
you. See you tomorrow.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Ta.